Ellie Marney's latest book is The Killing Code, which is set to be a success, especially since her last book, None Shall Sleep, became a New York Times bestseller. This is actually her 10th book, and she's had a unique journey as an author who has released books by mainstream publishers as well as indie publishing herself. The Killing Code is published by Allen and Unwin. Thank you so much for joining us today, Ellie.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's lovely to be here.
Now, we're here to talk about your big break, which actually happened quite some time ago, like more than 10 years ago. Can you tell us how you got what you were doing in life and then how you got your big break into the world of writing and publishing?
What was I doing at the time? I was raising lots of children. I had 4 children, and my youngest was 1-year-old. And before he was born, I had started submitting short stories to competitions. And then finally in 2009, I entered the Scarlet Stiletto Awards and had a really successful placing. I won the Kate Kennedy Best New Writer Award, which was very exciting. So that kind of spurred me to continue submitting and applying for competition entries.
What did you submit? Was it an entire manuscript or a short story? What did you submit?
Just a short story. It was just a short story for the Scarlet Stiletto Awards, which are run by Sisters in Crime annually. And I believe the cutoff for this year has just finished. But they have the largest cash prize pool of any short story competition in the country. So it was really exciting to be entering, but then, to have a placing was really exciting.
Well, it's not just a placing, you won that. You won.
Yeah, well, the following year, I tried again. I submitted a short story. It was called Tallow, and it was about a woman who discovers that her husband is a contract killer. And then when she finds out, he tries to kill her. And then in the struggle, she accidentally stabs him. And then she's got to get rid of a body. But fortunately, she's a soap and candle maker. So I incorporated that aspect into the short story and submitted it again to the Scarlet Stiletto Awards in 2010. And that year I won. I won the Scarlet Stiletto Award, which was their big cash prize, plus also national coverage. So that was the most encouragement that I'd received for my writing up until that date.
And what did that do for you?
Yeah, well, the Scarlet Stiletto is great because it's a national award. Your name gets published in the paper. You have something you can put on a writing CV. So it was really useful in that respect. Your story is also published in an anthology. So it was a fantastic opportunity. And at that stage, I had been writing, as a hobby for some time. And my hobby had expanded to fill somewhere between 14 and 17 hours a week. So that seemed like quite a lot of time to be spending on something that I was just categorizing as a fun thing to do in the margins. So once I had that win with the Scarlet Stiletto, I thought, okay, well, it's time to fish or cut bait. So I started working on a novel.
Fantastic.
And then, yeah, it was. I'd written probably nearly 100 short stories up to that point. And then I thought, okay, it's time to tackle something larger. And if I'm going to do this for so many hours a week, before my final child reaches school age and I have to start looking for, proper work, I'm going to give it a shot. I'm going to take a couple of years and see if I can figure this out and maybe sell something. So I wrote a book, and then it was signed in 2011. So my first book, Every Breath, was signed by Allen and Unwin in 2011 and then published in 2013.
And no doubt do you think that the winning and placing in the award was beneficial in terms of what, like your confidence in terms of what Alan and Unwin thought of you and your writing? Do you think that it played into that?
I think all of those things, yes, because up until that point, I'd had a few experiences with placing in competitions, which was really nice. And that kind of slowly bolstered my confidence, which when I originally started was at 0. And then, that takes a long time to build up. And then when I won a national competition, that gave me something that I could include in my query letters to publishers and saying, look, I've won this national competition. It's a women's crime writers competition. I'm now writing a book about, a crime story. So I'm writing crime fiction. Are you interested in having a look? And that would at least pique their interest in looking at what manuscript excerpt that I was sending. So I think it was comps have a great way of giving you a bit of a perspective, bit of objectivity on your own writing.
And so what happened after Every Breath?
So that was a really whirlwind experience of publishing. So when Every Breath was signed in 2011, I went through the process of preparing it for publication, and they were so enthusiastic, Alan and Unwin, about publishing the book. Pretty soon after its release, they were like, oh, well, I think we might publish a second one. And I'd already started work on a second one. So that moved along very quickly. So I actually published Every Breath, Every Word, and Every Move in a 3-year period, which is a very intense publication schedule, which I didn't realize, of course, until much time had passed. But yeah, those were my first 3 books. And then, of course, the book that I wrote after that, No Limits, was rejected by my publisher, which was a huge shock. And also, it's worth, I think, remembering that at any stage of your career as a published author, your work may be rejected. Not everything that you want to sell through a publisher or through a traditional publisher is going to make the cut.
And why do you think they rejected it?
I think it was a little bit too mature. I think Every Breath had been pitched squarely at the YA market, whereas this was much more upper YA, or some people have referred to it as, new adult, which is kind of that liminal age demographic between about 18 and 22, 25. So the characters had just finished high school or had been out of high school for about a year and a half. And that wasn't really what they were interested in for the Every series brand, which was fine. And I could totally understand. It was also some pretty tough material. It was about drug crime. So that was a shift away from, murder and conspiracy and dastardly daring do, which was a bit more characteristic of the Every series.
And so what happened then?
So after that rejection, I was like, obviously very sad, because it's very hard to trunk a manuscript. When you have a manuscript and you decide that it's not going to sell, you do what's called trunking. So you just put it in a drawer. Yeah. And then after that experience, I was like, well, what am I going to write next? So I talked with my publisher about that and started work on a new book, which eventually became White Knight, which was published in 2017. But in 2016, while I was writing that book, White Knight, I was still kind of ticking over this idea of No Limits in the back of my mind. So I had been looking around at self-publishing and what was happening in the self-publishing field, because it seemed like a really dynamic field that was changing really rapidly. And I thought, well, I've got a manuscript and I know that there'll be people out there who might want to read it. So I thought, okay, I could give this a shot. I could self-publish it. So that's what I did. So I published that book in 2016 myself, and then a year later, White Knight came out. And then in 2018, I published 3 more books independently on my own. Basically, I wanted to see what the demand was like and what my mastery of the media was like, because self-publishing is one of those things that you learn the skills and then you need to go through them again and again to kind of make them stick in your brain.
And so what was the demand like, and what was your mastery of the skills like? Overall, how do you describe your experience with indie publishing?
Indie publishing was great. I really enjoyed being in full control of everything. I think a lot of authors would appreciate having the control over the production process that you normally don't get to participate in when you're publishing through traditional houses. And that was actually really enjoyable, and learning new skills, even though it was a massive and extremely steep learning curve. It was something that I feel like really benefited me as an author, knowing what happens behind the scenes, how a manuscript is turned from a Word document into a typeset series of pages, what metadata is, how to negotiate with booksellers, how to arrange distribution and publicity or promotion for your titles yourself, how to set your own prices. All of those things are really useful, and they're not things that I think I would have dived into much if I just continued traditionally publishing everything.
And did indie publishing meet your financial expectations or book sale expectations?
It covered all my costs, and that was kind of what I was interested in doing, because I knew that I didn't want to just publish. I think people are wholly successful in indie publishing if they are completely devoted to that particular platform, to that particular style of publishing, and particularly if they're prepared to learn all the ins and outs of advertising, because that itself is practically a full-time job, and there's a lot of information out there, and it can be quite hard work to schedule advertising. So I wasn't prepared to go quite that far into learning all of those skills. But what I did learn was enough to allow me to pay off what I expended on the book production process. And it was another great way of keeping my name, my author name, coming forward, so it was a boost for my profile.
And so after those 3 books, then what did you do then?
I was really interested in exploring the US market. I mean, I think most authors in Australia are interested in what it's like to sell overseas, mainly because we're living in a very small country with a very small population. So there's a limit. There's definitely going to be a cap on what you can sell in this country. So, you have to look further afield. So I thought, okay, well, I'm going to pitch something to the US. I'd parted ways with my agent at that point, and I thought, okay, I'm ready. I need a new agent. I can pitch to a new market. So I need a new book. And then I was on writer's retreat, and I was discussing it with some other author friends, and they said, well, you're going to write a new book. What are you going to write? And I was like, I don't really know. And then a friend of mine said, what would you really want to write? If this was like the last book you could ever write, what would you desperately want to write? And I said, I'd really like to write a YA serial killer thriller. I want to write a YA Silence of the Lambs. And my friend was like, yes, this book, this is the one. And she was like, and I was like, it'll be too hardcore. And she said, don't worry about that. Just go for it. So that's what I did. I wrote an entire manuscript. I'd written half of it by the time I was ready to start pitching. I was given a recommendation for an agent by another author, and then I pitched the first half of the manuscript to them, and then they got back to me and said, have you got the other half of this book? Because we really like it. So I was like, oh, okay, give me 3 months. And then I madly finished the final half of the book in the 3 months. And that was None Shall Sleep.
Fantastic. And that went bonkers.
Yes, it
did. And it became a New York Times bestseller.
Yeah.
How did you feel when you heard that news?
In shock. Another author friend, I don't know if you know Will Kostakis. He sent me a text message out of the blue. I was doing all my usual, morning things, taking children to school and getting breakfast. And I'd just come from an appointment. And he was like, "Oh, congratulations, New York Times bestseller." He sent me this text. And I was like, "What are you talking about?"
Oh my God, what incredible news.
And he said, "You're a New York Times bestseller." And I said, he and I have always joked around. So I was like, "Yeah, sure, Will, whatever." And then he said, "No, seriously, you're a New York Times bestseller." That was about the time that I burst into tears, because it's like the winning a gold medal at the Olympics or something like that. It's the ultimate. It's the Everest for writers. So that was completely life-changing, and it has made a significant difference now to the way I pitch and the way I create new work.
In what way? I mean, well, before you answer that question, so you had thought, okay, I really want to break into the US market. So you set about with that in mind, and then it got published in the US. How has it then impacted the way you think about your writing in terms of, knowing that you want to get published more then?
Yeah. Well, for a start, everything that I pitch going forward has, I can now append the from New York Times bestseller, to my name, which makes a huge difference when you're pitching to publishers.
Yes.
Because they're actively looking for people who've had previous success. So that definitely, every success that you have as a writer is something that builds on to your CV. And because this is the pinnacle, it's the one that you're always going to aim for and mention first. So everything that I pitch going forward will have that, imprimatur on it, which is really exciting. And it also makes me think, well, it's not completely out of my reach to do this. I think, if you'd asked me 10 years ago when I first started, or even 5 years ago when I was still struggling to get things accepted by publishers or trying to get the next book out, I would have said, "Oh, well, maybe one day, I'll aim for the New York Times." But now I'm kind of like, well, you did it once, so what's to stop you from doing it again? So it's that real confidence boost which makes you comfortable in the idea that, yes, this is definitely an achievable outcome. It's something that I can continue to work toward. And also just to keep trying the things that readers, that my audience seems to really enjoy. So I am trying to continue to lean into YA crime, a little bit more tension and thrills on the page, a bit more blood and gore maybe than most YA writers include. So I'm jumping off from there basically.
Now, you don't live in New York or America for that matter, or even in a capital city of Australia. You live in sort of like rural Victoria, country Victoria. What did your agent think about the chances of, someone from country Victoria cracking it into the US? Did that matter to them at all, or they were just sold on the story?
They were just sold on the story. They weren't that worried about the distance, because everything's connected now.
Yeah.
So,
different.
that, yeah. And I think lockdowns over the last 2 years have really highlighted that aspect, that it doesn't matter where you are, that you can tune in to a book launch that's happening in New York or in Sydney or in Paris, or you can watch somebody on their balcony in Italy singing in the middle of lockdown. So whereas we're much closer together than we are divided, now that we have the capacity to go virtual.
Yeah, it's wonderful, isn't it?
Yeah. So in terms of that, it certainly wasn't off-putting to my agent to think, oh, I live out in a rural backwater in north central Victoria.
Okay. But that brings us then to The Killing Code.
Mm-hmm.
The Killing Code, your
Yeah,
latest
you got one
book.
too. I got
Oh,
one too.
yes. And see at the bottom from New York
Yeah.
Times bestselling author Ellie Marney. Love it. So,
Andy.
yes. So let's tell everyone what the Killing Code is about.
Okay, the Killing Code. I've been talking about it so much lately. The Killing Code is about 4 code girls in 1943 who are working at a secret code breaking facility called Arlington Hall, just outside of Washington, D.C., and how these girls have to join forces to break the code pattern of a serial killer who is murdering government girls. And that's what the story is about.
Wow. How did you come up with this idea?
Oh, it was just like one of those circuitous routes that authors always end up following. I think it's a bit of a, what do you say? Professional hazard to become a little bit obsessed with certain topics. You find something and you become a little into it. You really dive into it. And I watched a show called The Bletchley Circle, which was on telly a long time ago. And I think it was a BBC production. And it was about these women who had been code breakers during World War II. And then about 10 years after the war, they get together again. They gather together again to solve a mystery. And I thought that would be really cool if it was teenage girls, because, I write for teenagers. So teenage girls are my wheelhouse. And then I was like, okay, how about Bletchley Park? So I looked into Bletchley Park, where Alan Turing broke the Enigma code. And that was really fascinating to me. The fact that there was 70% of the workforce was female, that the average age was 19. They were also young. It was such an intense place to work on 24-hour shift rotations. And then I looked a little bit further along the thread and found this place called Arlington Hall, which was the Allied US Army Center for signal breaking, for signal intelligence operations in the States. And then as soon as I read this one line that said, it used to be a junior college for young ladies. And I was like, that's it. That's my entry point. Because, you've got a whole bunch of teenage girls all living in this hot house environment in this decrepit old mansion, which used to be a junior college for women. And now they're all living there, sharing clothes and nail polish and rations, trying to get these codes frantically broken in time to prevent deaths in the field in World War II. And then add a little bit of murder and we're off to the races.
So why your interest in serial killing?
Why? I don't know. That's a very good question, isn't it? I don't know. I'm fascinated by, I shouldn't say I'm fascinated by serial killers, should I? That makes me sound really weird. I am. Look, I actually think those characters are always really interesting on the page because they're people, they're characters who make decisions that we can't even imagine making. And they're completely unpredictable. So we can't see what, is driving them. And that makes them interesting to us as a reader because you just don't know what they're going to do next. But I'm also really completely fascinated with the detectives who explore these kinds of mysteries because, what motivates you to do that? What motivates you to continue pursuing this kind of, I don't know, really horrible person in the face of great personal danger. And yeah, I find that really fascinating. Shows like Mindhunter are just catnip for me.
All right. So tell us, what was the most satisfying thing about writing The Killing Code?
The most satisfying thing, I think, was feeling like recognizing the simpatico between the relationship, between the situation of the girls who were working at Arlington Hall, working so hard to break these codes, working together in this really collegial environment, but all squashed in together. And being able to talk about the friendships between them and the relationships between them and the romance between them as well, because, you know, there's a queer romance at the center of the book. And to be able to produce all of that while I was in turn locked down with my family in this hothouse environment in my tiny little house with all my kids at home, and my partner trying to do remote teaching at the kitchen table while my children are trying to do remote learning and I was trying to work. Just the fact that I managed to get the book written, that in itself was a major victory.
Well, congratulations on The Killing Code. Very excited for you. Thank you
Thank
for
you so
sharing
much.
your author journey with us. And I have no doubt this is going to be another cracker. Thanks so much for your time today,
Thanks
Ellie.
so much, Valerie. It was great to talk to you.